Naomi Hart had been rejected at the altar 3 times, always for the same reason: the wrong color skin, the wrong bloodline, the wrong heritage. Now she stood alone on a frozen Montana platform, clutching a mail-order marriage letter that promised her a fourth chance. But when the train pulled away and left her in the howling wind with no husband waiting, she finally understood the cruel truth. She was the punchline to someone's twisted joke. Then a tiny voice asked, "Did your daddy say no?" And a little girl with tangled braids took her hand. That moment would save them both. Before we begin this journey together, I invite you to stay with Naomi's story until the very end. When you finish, please comment below with the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels across the world. The Montana wind cut through Naomi Hart's worn traveling coat like 1,000 tiny knives, each gust reminding her that she was, once again, utterly alone. She stood on the wooden platform of Copper Ridge Station, her fingers numb around the crumpled letter she'd read so many times the creases had nearly torn through. The train's whistle faded into the distance, taking with it her last connection to anywhere else, to anyone who might have cared whether she lived or died. Around her, the platform emptied quickly. Families reunited with shouts and embraces. A merchant greeted his supply shipment. A young couple kissed without shame, their joy so bright it hurt to witness. Naomi turned away, her throat tight, and studied the letter again, though she'd memorized every word. "Miss Hart, I am in need of a wife to help raise my daughter and manage my household. I am a widower of good standing with land and livestock. If you are willing to work hard and provide a mother's care, I can offer you a home and protection. The arrangement would be one of practical partnership. Reply if interested. Rhett Lawson." Practical partnership. Those words had given her hope during the 3-day journey from Kansas. Not love, not passion, just a chance to be useful, to belong somewhere. After 3 broken engagements, 3 men who'd taken one look at her copper skin and black hair and suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere, Naomi had stopped dreaming of romance. She just wanted a place where her mixed heritage wouldn't matter, where her Comanche mother's blood and her white father's name could exist together without shame. But Rhett Lawson wasn't here. No one was here. Naomi's hand shook as she scanned the platform one more time, searching for a tall rancher, a shy widower, anyone who might step forward and claim her. The station master glanced at her, then quickly looked away. A woman in a fine purple dress whispered something to her companion, and they both stared at Naomi with the particular expression she knew too well: curiosity mixed with distaste, fascination threaded with disgust. "Savage blood," someone murmured, just loud enough to carry. Naomi's spine stiffened. She'd heard worse. She'd survived worse. But this public abandonment, this fresh humiliation in a town where she knew no one, felt like the final crack in a dam she'd spent years building to hold back her grief. She was 24 years old, and she was tired. Tired of hoping, tired of traveling to strange towns with nothing but a small trunk and desperate prayers. Tired of seeing men's faces change when they realized what she was, who her mother had been. Tired of being almost enough, almost acceptable, almost worthy of love. The platform had cleared now except for a few stragglers loading cargo onto a wagon. Naomi picked up her trunk. Everything she owned fit inside its battered frame, and walked toward the station house, her boots echoing on the wooden planks. She had $17.30 left, enough for perhaps 2 weeks of room and board, if she could find someone willing to rent to a woman of questionable heritage. After that, she refused to think about after that. "Excuse me, miss." The station master appeared in the doorway, his weathered face uncertain. "You waiting on someone? Only it's getting cold and we close up in an hour." "I was told someone would meet me." Naomi's voice came out steadier than she felt. "A Mr. Rhett Lawson?" Recognition flickered in the man's eyes, followed quickly by something like pity. "Rhett? He hasn't been to town in near about a month, miss. Keeps to himself mostly, since his wife passed. His place is about 6 miles north, past the timberline." 6 miles. In this wind, with darkness coming on, Naomi's hope, already thin as frost, shattered completely. She nodded once, not trusting her voice, and turned toward the street. That's when she heard it, a small, soft voice that somehow cut through the wind and reached straight into her breaking heart. Did your daddy say no? Naomi looked down into the face of a little girl, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, with tangled dark braids and enormous brown eyes. She wore a coat 2 sizes too large, the sleeves rolled up multiple times, and her boots were scuffed nearly white. But it was the expression on her face that stopped Naomi cold, the look of someone who understood rejection intimately, who recognized it in others. I'm sorry? Naomi knelt down, bringing herself to the child's level, despite the wind whipping her skirts. Your daddy. The girl's voice was patient, as though explaining something obvious. Did he say no? Is that why you look so sad? Something in Naomi's chest cracked wide open. This child, this tiny stranger, had looked at her face and seen not savage blood or questionable heritage, but simply sadness. Understood loneliness. Known abandonment. I don't have a daddy anymore, Naomi said softly. But yes, someone said no. Someone I thought wanted me to come here. The girl nodded gravely, as though this made perfect sense. People say no a lot. My daddy's sad because my mama said no, but she didn't mean to. She got sick and had to go to heaven. She reached out and touched Naomi's hand with fingers that were sticky with something, probably candy, and achingly gentle. I don't want you to be sad. Do you want to come home with me? We have soup. Maddie! A man's voice cut across the platform, rough with panic. Maddie, what did I tell you about wandering off? Naomi straightened as a figure emerged from behind the station house, a tall man in a heavy coat, his dark hair longer than fashion dictated, his face shadowed by several days' worth of beard. He moved with the particular awareness of someone who spent most of his time alone, scanning constantly, trusting nothing. His eyes found the little girl immediately, relief washing over his features before settling into something harder as his gaze shifted to Naomi. She saw it happen, that quick assessment, that moment of recognition when he took in her features and understood what she was. But unlike the others, unlike the 3 men who'd broken their promises and her heart, this man's expression didn't change. He just looked tired. I'm sorry if my daughter bothered you, ma'am. His voice was careful, neutral. Maddie, come here. Now. But Papa, she's sad because someone said no. Maddie didn't move from Naomi's side. Instead, she grabbed Naomi's hand and held on tight. We should take her home. She needs soup. The man, Rhett Lawson, Naomi realized with a jolt, closed his eyes briefly as though praying for patience. When he opened them again, he was looking directly at Naomi, and she saw something shift in his face as he recognized her. Not from meeting before, but from understanding. Miss Hart? His voice held no inflection, no judgment, just a flat statement of fact. Mr. Lawson. Naomi lifted her chin, refusing to show how completely shattered she felt. I received your letter. I came as you requested. Silence stretched between them like a frozen river, dangerous and uncertain. Around them, the last of the townspeople had retreated indoors, leaving the platform to the wind and 3 people who didn't quite fit anywhere else. I didn't write any letter. Rhett's words fell like stones. Of course he hadn't. Naomi felt something inside her go very still and very cold. Another cruel joke. Another man who would look at her and see only what she lacked, what she was instead of who she might be. She opened her mouth to speak, but Maddie beat her to it. Can she come anyway? The little girl's voice was small but determined. Please, Papa. She came all this way and it's getting dark, and she doesn't have anywhere to go. I can tell. She looked up at Naomi with absolute certainty. Can you be my mommy forever? Maddie, that's not how... Rhett started, but Naomi interrupted him. I'm sorry to have troubled you, Mr. Lawson. She pulled her hand gently from Maddie's grasp, even though it felt like tearing away from the only kindness she'd been shown in months. This was clearly a mistake. I'll find accommodation in town and arrange passage back to Kansas. She picked up her trunk and turned toward the street, her vision blurring. She would not cry. Not here, not in front of this man and his daughter, not where anyone could see. She would find somewhere private, somewhere dark, and then she would allow herself to break. Miss Hart. Wait. Naomi stopped but didn't turn around. She heard Rhett Lawson's heavy footsteps on the platform, heard him murmur something to Maddie that she couldn't quite catch. Then he was beside her, not touching, just standing there like a question mark in human form. "If I leave you here, you'll freeze before you find a boarding house that'll take you." His voice was matter of fact, without pity or judgment. "And if you do find one, they'll charge you triple what it's worth and make you feel about 3 inches tall while they do it. I know this town." "That's not your concern." Naomi's voice was steady now, almost empty. "My daughter made it my concern." Rhett sighed, a sound that carried the weight of many burdens. "Look, I don't know who wrote that letter, but you came a long way on what you thought was a promise. I can't give you what you thought you were coming to, but I can offer you one night, food, a warm fire, somewhere safe to sleep. Tomorrow you can decide what you want to do, and I'll take you wherever you need to go. No strings, no expectations, just one night of decency between strangers." Naomi finally turned to look at him. His face was weather-beaten and weary, marked by grief and hard work. But his eyes were steady, and she saw no mockery in them, no cruelty, just exhaustion and a kind of resigned honor that recognized debt when it existed. "Why?" she asked. "Because I've been where you are." His answer was simple, final. Maybe not exactly, but close enough. "Because my daughter asked me to, and I can't say no to her when she's trying to be kind. Because it's the right thing to do, and those are getting scarce enough that when you can do one, you probably should." Maddie appeared between them, slipping her hand into Naomi's again. "Please come home with us. I'll share my room, and Papa makes really good biscuits, even though they're kind of lumpy." Despite everything, the humiliation, the exhaustion, the bone-deep ache of being unwanted one more time, Naomi felt a smile tug at her lips. This child, with her tangled braids and oversized coat and absolute conviction that sad strangers needed soup, was impossible to resist. "Just one night," Rhett repeated, his voice softer now. "That's all I'm promising. But it's a true promise. You'll be safe." Naomi looked at him, really looked, and saw the same thing she'd felt in herself, the wariness of someone who'd been hurt badly enough to make armor out of distance. He wasn't offering rescue or romance. He was offering basic human decency, and somehow that honesty was more compelling than any flowery promise could have been. "All right," she said quietly. "One night. Thank you." Rhett nodded once and picked up her trunk as though it weighed nothing. Maddie kept hold of Naomi's hand as they walked to a battered wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. The sun was setting now, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of copper and gold that reminded Naomi painfully of her mother's voice describing the sacred peaks of her childhood. They climbed into the wagon, Maddie between them, chattering about her collection of interesting rocks and how her doll needed a new dress, and did Naomi know any songs? And headed north out of town. Naomi watched Copper Ridge disappear behind them, its warm lights growing distant, and wondered what she'd just agreed to. The ride to Rhett's homestead took nearly an hour, following a rough track through pine forest and across frozen meadows. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped viciously. Maddie burrowed against Naomi's side, and Naomi wrapped her coat around the child without thinking. Rhett noticed but said nothing, just urged the horses onward through the deepening cold. Finally, they emerged into a clearing where a small cabin stood outlined against the starlight. It was modest, perhaps 3 rooms with a stone chimney and a covered porch, but it looked solid and well-maintained. A barn and a small corral occupied one side of the clearing, and Naomi could hear animals moving inside, the soft sound of horses and what might have been a milk cow. "Home," Maddie announced, sitting up with renewed energy. "We're home, Papa." Rhett pulled the wagon up to the porch and jumped down, lifting Maddie out before turning to offer Naomi his hand. She hesitated for just a moment before taking it, feeling the calluses that marked a working man's palm, the strength that came from years of hard labor. He set her down gently and released her hand immediately, already turning to unhitch the horses. "Maddie, take Miss Hart inside and start the fire going. I'll be in after I see to the team." "Come on!" Maddie grabbed Naomi's hand again. The child seemed to exist in a permanent state of hand-holding and tugged her toward the door. "You're going to love it. Well, it's kind of small, but it's warm, and we have a stove that Papa fixed so it doesn't smoke anymore, and there's a real window, and..." The door swung open, and warmth rushed out to meet them. Maddie pulled Naomi inside and immediately began lighting lamps with the practiced ease of a child who'd done this many times before. As light filled the space, Naomi looked around at what might have been her home if things had been different. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room combined. A black stove dominated one wall, with a neat stack of firewood beside it. A rough table and 4 mismatched chairs occupied the center of the space. Shelves held dishes, food supplies, and a few books. Everything was clean but worn, practical but sparse. This was the home of someone who'd stopped caring about comfort and focused only on survival. But what caught Naomi's attention, what made her breath stop in her chest, was the corner near the window where a wooden trunk sat open, revealing folded fabric in rich earth tones. On top of the trunk lay a dress, a traditional Comanche dress, beautifully beaded, the kind her mother had worn when Naomi was very small. Beside it hung a medicine bag decorated with symbols Naomi recognized, and a cradle board propped against the wall bore the marks of careful craftsmanship and deep love. That was Mama's. Maddie's voice was soft now, reverent. Papa won't let anyone touch it. He says it's sacred. Do you know what sacred means? Yes, Naomi whispered, her eyes burning. I know exactly what it means. She moved closer, drawn by recognition and memory. The beadwork was exquisite, patterns that told stories, colors that held meaning. This wasn't decoration purchased from a trader. This was the real thing, made by someone who knew the old ways, who carried tradition in her hands and heart. Was your mother Comanche? Naomi asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear it confirmed. Maddie nodded. Papa said she was the prettiest lady in the whole world. She taught me songs, but I forget some of the words now. She got sick when I was little, and then she went to heaven. Papa gets sad when I ask about her, so I try not to ask too much. The door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and Rhett carrying Naomi's trunk. He set it down near the stove and shrugged out of his coat, revealing a faded work shirt and suspenders. His eyes went immediately to where Naomi stood near his wife's belongings, and his whole body tensed. Maddie, I told you not to. She didn't show me, Naomi said quickly, turning to face him. I saw it myself. My mother was Comanche too. My father was a white fur trader who married her properly and gave me his name. But that didn't stop people from looking at me like I was something dirty. She met his eyes steadily. That's why those 3 men changed their minds about marrying me. That's why whoever wrote that letter thought it would be funny to make me travel all this way for nothing, because I'm half-breed, and in most places, that makes me worth less than nothing. Silence fell between them like snow. Maddie looked from Naomi to her father, sensing the weight of what was being said, even if she didn't fully understand it. Rhett's jaw worked, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. My wife's name was Sarah Running Deer, he said finally, his voice rough. We met when I was working as a scout for the army. I hated that job, but I needed the money. She was traveling with her family trying to find safe land after their band was pushed off their territory. We talked, we fell in love, and I married her despite my commanding officer telling me I was throwing my life away on a squaw. The word came out like poison. I left the army, built this cabin, and we had 5 years together. 5 years of being happy, of having Maddie, of making a life that felt right even when the rest of the world said it was wrong. He moved to the stove and began building up the fire, his movements sharp and precise. Then Sarah got pneumonia 2 winters ago. I rode to town for the doctor, but he wouldn't come. Said he didn't treat Indians. Didn't matter if she was married to a white man or not. By the time I found someone who would help, it was too late. Sarah died while I was riding back with medicine that might have saved her. Naomi's throat constricted. She knew that story, had heard versions of it from her mother's people. The casual cruelty, the denial of basic humanity, the way death could come not from disease alone, but from the refusal of mercy. I'm sorry, she said softly. I'm so sorry. Rhett shook his head sharply, as though dislodging tears. After the funeral, people started talking. Some said Sarah had infected me and Maddie, that we carried savage blood now. Others said it was God's judgment on an unnatural marriage. A few tried to take Maddie away, said a half-breed child needed to be with her own kind, though nobody could quite agree on which kind that was supposed to be. He straightened, facing Naomi fully. So yes, Miss Hart, I know what it's like to be judged for who you love. I know what it's like to be rejected because you don't fit into neat categories. And I know what it's like to travel somewhere hoping for acceptance and finding only closed doors." "Then why didn't you write that letter?" Naomi asked. "If you understand all that, why didn't you want—" "Because I can't," Rhett interrupted, his voice breaking. "Because I loved my wife with everything in me. And when she died, something in me died too. Because Maddie needs stability and safety, not a father who's still drowning in grief. Because I would be using you, Miss Hart, and you deserve better than that." They stood facing each other across the small room, two people marked by the same scars, carrying the same burden of being too much of one thing and not enough of another. Maddie watched them with wide eyes, sensing the storm of emotion even if she couldn't name it. "What if I don't need better?" Naomi heard herself say. "What if one night of decency and warm food is already more than I expected? What if I'm tired of deserving things I never get and would settle for something small and real instead?" Rhett stared at her, and she saw the exact moment when he understood that she wasn't asking for promises or romance. She was just asking to be allowed to exist, to breathe, to rest without judgment for one single night. "All right then," he said quietly. "Let's make dinner." They worked together in careful silence, each respecting the other's space. Rhett pulled out supplies, potatoes, dried meat, flour for biscuits, while Naomi automatically began peeling vegetables, falling into the rhythm of kitchen work. Maddie chattered between them, showing Naomi her collection of rocks. "This one looks like a face, see?" And telling stories about her chickens. "The brown one is mean, but she makes the best eggs." As the stew simmered and the biscuits baked, filling the cabin with rich smells that made Naomi's stomach ache with hunger, she felt something unexpected. Peace. Not happiness, not yet, but the absence of immediate threat. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't bracing for rejection, wasn't waiting for someone to notice her heritage and recoil, wasn't performing acceptability for an audience that would never be satisfied. Here, in this tiny cabin with a grieving widower and his lonely daughter, she could simply be. They ate at the rough table, Maddie keeping up a steady stream of conversation that neither adult had the heart to interrupt. The food was simple but good, prepared with the no-nonsense competence of someone who cooked for survival rather than pleasure. When they finished, Rhett showed Naomi to Maddie's small room where a second bed had been hastily made up with clean linens. "Maddie will share with you tonight," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "I'll be in the main room if you need anything. Door has a lock on the inside if that makes you feel safer." "Thank you," Naomi said, meaning it for more than just the room. He nodded once and retreated, pulling the door almost closed behind him. Maddie immediately bounced onto her bed and patted the space beside her. "Will you tell me a story? Papa tries, but he always falls asleep in the middle. He works too hard." Naomi sat down, and Maddie curled against her side like a puppy seeking warmth. In the lamplight, with the child's weight pressing against her ribs, Naomi felt tears threaten again, but not from despair this time, from something dangerously close to belonging. "Once upon a time," she began, her voice soft, "there was a little girl who could talk to birds." She wove a story from her mother's tradition, about a child who helped a wounded eagle and was rewarded with the ability to fly. Maddie's eyes grew heavy, her breathing deepening, but she fought sleep to hear the ending. When Naomi finally whispered the last words, "and she flew home," where people who loved her were waiting, Maddie was already drifting off. "Stay," the little girl mumbled, her hand finding Naomi's and holding tight even in sleep. "Don't go, please don't go." Naomi sat very still, looking down at this child who had claimed her with such easy certainty, who had seen her sadness and responded with soup and stories and the kind of uncomplicated affection that asked for nothing in return. Through the thin walls, she could hear Rhett moving in the main room, banking the fire, checking the locks, settling in for a night of what she suspected was fitful sleep. She should leave tomorrow, should find her way back to Kansas or on to California or anywhere else that might offer a fresh start, should stop hoping that anywhere would ever feel like home, that anyone would ever choose her knowing full well what she was. But as she lay down beside Maddie, pulling the quilts up over them both, listening to the wind howl outside and the fire crackle within, Naomi couldn't quite make herself believe in leaving. Not yet. Not when for the first time in her life someone had said, "Can you be my mommy forever?" And meant it with their whole heart. Tomorrow would come with its decisions and departures. Tonight, she would let herself pretend this warmth was real, this acceptance was lasting, this makeshift family was hers. Just for tonight, she would let herself hope. Naomi woke to the sound of someone moving quietly in the kitchen. For a confused moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed was too soft, the air too warm, the breathing beside her too small and trusting. Then memory flooded back. The empty train platform, Maddie's sticky hand in hers, Rhett's careful offer of one safe night. She'd slept deeply for the first time in weeks, too exhausted to maintain her usual vigilance. Now pale winter light filtered through the single window, and Maddie was curled against her like a comma, one small hand still clutching Naomi's sleeve even in sleep. Moving carefully to avoid waking the child, Naomi rose and smoothed her rumpled dress. She had no mirror, but used her fingers to braid her hair into something respectable, then opened the door to find Rhett crouched by the stove, coaxing the fire back to life. He looked up at her approach, his face unreadable in the dim light. "Coffee's almost ready. Did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," Naomi admitted. "Thank you." He nodded and returned his attention to the stove, but she caught the slight easing of tension in his shoulders. Whatever he'd been worried about, that she'd complain, that she'd demand more than he'd promised, that she'd be trouble, hadn't materialized. "I'll make breakfast," Naomi said, moving toward the shelves where she'd seen supplies the night before. "It's the least I can do." "You don't have to." "I know." She met his eyes steadily. "But I'm going to anyway." They worked in silence, broken only by the sounds of cooking, the sizzle of bacon, the scrape of a spatula, the whistle of the kettle. It was strange, Naomi thought, how quickly certain rhythms could feel natural. She knew where he kept the plates without asking, anticipated when he needed more firewood, moved around him in the small space without collision or awkwardness. Maddie emerged just as Naomi was setting the table, her hair a wild tangle and her nightgown twisted around her legs. She looked at Naomi with sleepy confusion that quickly transformed into joy. "You're still here, Papa." "She stayed." "Just like I promised," Rhett said quietly, lifting his daughter and setting her in a chair. "Wash your hands before you eat." Maddie scrambled to obey, chattering the whole time about her dreams and the snow she could see through the window, and did Naomi think the chickens would lay eggs today? They ate together, and if the meal was punctuated by long silences between the adults, Maddie filled them effortlessly with her stream of observations and questions. After breakfast, Rhett pushed back from the table and looked at Naomi with the careful expression of someone about to honor a difficult commitment. "I'll hitch up the wagon whenever you're ready. We can leave within the hour if you want to catch the afternoon train." Leave. Return to the station, to the whispers and stares, to the uncertainty of what came next. Naomi's hand stilled on the dishes she'd been clearing. She should want to go, should be eager to put this humiliation behind her and find somewhere new to start over. But the thought of leaving this warm cabin, of never seeing Maddie's gap-toothed smile again, of returning to her endless wandering, made her chest ache. "Papa, no!" Maddie's voice cracked with distress. "She can't go yet. She just got here." "Maddie, we talked about this," Rhett said gently. "Miss Hart has her own life. She only stayed one night because someone played a cruel joke." A new voice cut through the conversation, and they all turned to see a boy of perhaps 13 standing in the doorway, his face flushed with cold and something that looked like shame. "I'm sorry, miss. I didn't know you'd actually come." Rhett was on his feet in an instant, his entire body radiating controlled fury. "Tommy Prescott, what the hell are you doing on my property?" The boy, Tommy, shifted his weight nervously but didn't run. "I came to apologize and to explain. My pa sent me." He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and held it out. "This is the real letter. The one Mr. Lawson actually wrote before he changed his mind and decided not to send it." Naomi felt the blood drain from her face. Rhett moved forward and snatched the paper, his jaw tight as he read. She watched his expression shift from anger to something more complex, recognition maybe, or regret. "Where did you get this?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "Found it in the mercantile trash bin a couple months ago," Tommy admitted. "I thought it was funny, you know. The idea that you'd want a mail-order bride when everyone knows you're still grieving Miss Sarah, so I copied it and sent it to that bride agency in Kansas as a joke. I put your name on it, but used the mercantile as the return address so you wouldn't know. I didn't think about... He looked at Naomi, his face miserable. I didn't think about you being a real person. Someone who'd spend money and travel all this way. My pa found out what I did and tanned my hide good. He said I had to come apologize in person and offer to work off the cost of your travel. The silence that followed was suffocating. Naomi stared at this boy who had upended her life on a whim, who had taken her last shred of hope and turned it into entertainment. She wanted to rage at him, to make him understand the full weight of what he'd done, but the words wouldn't come. Rhett handed her the paper. His face was carved from stone. Read it. Naomi's hands shook as she unfolded the letter. The handwriting was rough but careful, the words clearly labored over. I am writing to inquire about finding a wife through your service. I am a widower with a young daughter who needs a mother's care. I have land and livestock and can provide a decent home. I am looking for someone who understands what it means to be marked by the world as different, who knows how to live with grief without letting it consume everything, who can see past scars to whatever good might remain. I will not lie and say I can offer love right away, but I can offer respect, safety, and a genuine partnership in building a life together. If there is a woman who has been rejected by others, who carries wounds of her own and understands that healing is slow work, I would welcome the chance to meet her. Naomi read it twice, her vision blurring. This letter, this honest, raw, vulnerable letter, was nothing like the cold, practical message she'd received. This was written by someone who understood exactly what she'd been through, who was offering not rescue, but recognition. Partnership with another wounded soul. When did you write this? She asked Rhett, her voice barely a whisper. He wouldn't meet her eyes. About 2 months after Sarah died. I was drowning. Maddie was asking for her mama every night, and I couldn't comfort her because I was too broken myself. I thought maybe... He stopped, swallowed hard. I thought maybe someone who'd been hurt badly enough would understand, would accept what little I had to offer. But then I realized I was being selfish. I was looking for someone to fix me, to fix us, and that's not fair. That's using someone. So I threw it away. And I fished it out and sent it anyway, Tommy said miserably. I'm sorry, Mr. Lawson. I'm really sorry. And I'm sorry to you too, miss. I'll work all winter if I have to pay back what you spent getting here. Naomi looked at this child who'd caused such chaos, saw the genuine remorse in his face, and felt her anger deflate. He was just a boy who'd made a thoughtless mistake, not understanding the ripples it would cause. She knew that kind of thoughtlessness, had been on the receiving end of it her entire life. How old are you, Tommy? She asked. 13, ma'am. Do you know what happened to my mother's people? She kept her voice gentle, but firm. Do you know about the forced removals, the broken treaties, the families torn apart because someone thought it would be funny or profitable or righteous to treat human beings like problems to be solved? Tommy's face went pale. No, ma'am. I mean, I know some, but it starts small, Naomi continued. With jokes and pranks and people who don't think about consequences because they've never had to live with them. Your prank cost me almost everything I had left. It brought me to a place where I thought I'd found acceptance, only to discover it was all a lie. Do you understand how that feels? No, ma'am. Tommy's voice was thick with tears now. But I'm trying to. That's why I came. To face what I did and try to make it right. Naomi studied him for a long moment, then glanced at Rhett, who was watching her with something like awe in his expression. She turned back to Tommy. Then here's what you're going to do. You're going to go back to town and tell everyone exactly what you did and why it was wrong. Not because your father made you, but because you choose to own your mistake. You're going to work for Mr. Prescott at the mercantile and save half your wages to repay my travel costs. And you're going to remember this feeling the next time you think someone else's pain might be entertaining. Yes, ma'am. Tommy wiped his eyes with his sleeve. I will. I promise. Good. Now go home before your parents worry. The boy fled and silence descended on the cabin once more. Maddie had been watching everything with wide eyes, and now she climbed down from her chair and wrapped her arms around Naomi's waist. You were nice to him even though he was mean to you. Mama would have liked that. Naomi's hand came up automatically to stroke the child's tangled hair. Over Maddie's head, she met Rhett's eyes and saw him struggling with something, wrestling with words that didn't want to come. You didn't have to do that, he said finally. Let him off easy, I mean. You had every right to make him pay harder. Maybe, but anger doesn't change what happened. It just poisons what comes next. Naomi gently disentangled herself from Maddie and moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered clearing. Besides, he's just a boy. He didn't create the world that made his joke possible. He just lives in it, like the rest of us. Rhett came to stand beside her, careful to maintain distance. That letter he brought, the one I actually wrote. Did you mean what you said to him about coming here thinking you'd found acceptance? Yes. The word was simple, final. Even after reading that? Even knowing I was looking for someone wounded enough to settle for half a life? Naomi turned to face him fully. I've been proposed to 3 times, Mr. Lawson. 3 different men who made promises and plans, who talked about futures and family, and every single one of them took one good look at me and remembered urgent business elsewhere. Your letter was the first honest thing anyone ever offered me. You didn't promise love or happiness. You promised respect and safety and the slow work of healing. Do you know how rare that is? To have someone acknowledge that broken things don't just magically fix themselves? Rhett's throat worked as he swallowed. I threw that letter away for a reason. I'm still not sure I have anything worth offering. Then let me ask you something. Naomi held his gaze steadily. If I hadn't shown up yesterday, if Tommy Prescott had never played his prank, would you and Maddie be fine? Would you be happy? He flinched as though she'd struck him. We're surviving. That's not what I asked. Silence stretched between them. Heavy with truth, neither wanted to speak. Finally, Rhett turned away, his shoulders hunched with the weight of admission. No, we're not fine. Maddie cries for her mama every night. I can't cook worth a damn, and the cabin's falling apart because I can't make myself care about fixing it. I work myself to exhaustion, so I'll sleep without dreaming, and most days the only thing that gets me out of bed is knowing my daughter needs me. We're surviving, but we're not living. Haven't been for 2 years. Papa? Maddie's small voice came from behind them, uncertain and frightened. Are you sad again? Rhett spun around and knelt to gather his daughter into his arms. I'm sorry, baby. I didn't mean for you to hear that. But it's true, isn't it? We're not happy. Not really. Maddie's face crumpled. I try to be good so you won't be sadder, but it doesn't help. And I miss Mama so much it hurts, but I don't want to make you hurt more by talking about her. Watching them cling to each other, Naomi felt something shift in her chest. These 2 broken people, trying so hard to protect each other that they were both slowly suffocating under the weight of unspoken grief. She recognized it because she'd lived it herself, moving through life like a ghost, always careful never to take up too much space or ask for too much comfort. She moved to them and knelt down, completing their small circle. Maddie, can I tell you something your mama would want you to know? The child looked at her with desperate hope. You knew her? No, but I knew women like her. Women who had to be strong because the world demanded it, who carried traditions and love and fierce determination to protect their families. And I promise you, your mama would never want you to hide your feelings to protect your papa. She'd want you to cry when you need to cry, to talk about her when you need to remember, to ask for help when the sadness gets too heavy. But Papa gets so sad when I talk about her because he misses her too, Naomi said gently, not because you're doing anything wrong. You're not responsible for your father's grief, sweetheart, and he's not responsible for fixing all of yours. That's too big a job for either of you alone. Rhett's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Miss Hart. Naomi, if we're going to be honest with each other, you should use my name. Naomi, then. He said it carefully, like testing the weight of it. I don't know what you're suggesting here. You came for a husband and a home, and I'm not ready for that. I don't know if I'll ever be ready for that. I'm not asking you to be. Naomi kept her voice calm, reasonable, even as her heart pounded. I'm saying that I came here with nothing, no money, no prospects, nowhere else to go. And I found 2 people who are drowning in grief and loneliness, who need help. They're too proud or too scared to ask for. Maybe that's not the romantic story anyone imagined, but it's real. And right now, real is all I can handle. You want to stay? As what? A housekeeper? As someone who understands what it means to survive when you can't quite figure out how to live. As someone who can help with Maddie and cooking and all the daily things that feel impossible when you're drowning. As someone who needs a place to belong just as much as you need someone to help carry the weight. Maddie looked between them, her face bright with fragile hope. Does that mean you're staying? Really staying? Naomi felt the enormity of what she was suggesting crash over her. This wasn't the safe marriage she'd traveled here hoping for. This was stepping into a household full of ghosts, offering to help two strangers rebuild something she wasn't sure she knew how to build herself. It was risky and uncertain, and probably foolish. But the alternative was climbing back into that wagon, returning to the train station, and resuming her endless search for somewhere that would accept her. And she was so tired of searching. If your father agrees, yes, I'll stay. Rhett looked at her for a long moment, his face working through a dozen emotions. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough with something that might have been hope or fear or both. 1 month. Stay for 1 month, and we'll see if this can work. I'll pay you fair wages, not much, but enough. You'll have your own room, your own space. No obligations beyond helping with the household and Maddie. After a month, we'll both know if this is sustainable or just postponing the inevitable. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't even a real offer of permanence, but it was honest, and it was more than she'd had yesterday. 1 month, Naomi agreed, extending her hand. Rhett shook it, his grip firm and warm, and something passed between them, not attraction, not yet, but recognition. Two survivors agreeing to stop drowning alone and see if they could learn to swim together. Maddie let out a whoop of joy and threw her arms around both of them. We're going to be a family. Not the regular kind, maybe, but still a family. Easy, little one. Rhett's voice was gentle but firm. We're just trying this out. Don't get your hopes too high. But as they stood together in the morning light, Naomi thought maybe Maddie understood something the adults didn't. Maybe family wasn't about romance or perfect circumstances. Maybe it was just about choosing not to be alone. About finding people whose broken pieces fit somehow with yours. The next few days fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. Naomi took over the cooking and discovered that Rhett hadn't been exaggerating about his limitations. The man could burn water and had apparently been feeding himself and Maddie on jerky and badly scorched biscuits for months. She cleaned the cabin thoroughly, discovering repairs that needed attention and organizing supplies that had been shoved haphazardly onto shelves. Rhett worked from dawn to dusk, checking his small herd of cattle, repairing fences, chopping wood. He was polite but distant, treating Naomi with careful courtesy that never quite relaxed into comfort. At meals, he spoke mainly to Maddie, asking about her day and listening with obvious love to her chatter. But his eyes held shadows that never quite lifted. Maddie, by contrast, attached herself to Naomi like a burr. She followed her everywhere, talking constantly, asking questions, offering help that was more hindrance than assistance, but given with such eager earnestness that Naomi couldn't refuse. The child was starved for female attention, for the particular comfort that only a mother figure could provide. On the third evening, as Naomi was tucking Maddie into bed, the little girl asked the question that had clearly been building. Did your mama teach you stories? Indian stories, I mean. Naomi settled onto the edge of the bed, smoothing the quilt. Some. She died when I was 10, but before that she told me stories about how the world was made, about clever coyotes and brave warriors and women who could talk to animals. My mama told me some too, but I can't remember them right. Papa tries, but he gets the words wrong because he's not Comanche. He's just a white man who loved a Comanche lady. That's not a small thing, you know, loving someone when the world says you shouldn't. That takes more courage than most people have. Maddie considered this, her small face serious. Do you think Mama knew Papa loved her, even when she was dying? The question pierced straight through Naomi's defenses. She thought about her own mother, about those final days when fever took her piece by piece, about her father's helpless grief as he watched the woman he loved slip away. Yes, she said firmly, I think your mama knew. Love isn't just about the easy times. It's about who stays when things get hard. Your papa stayed. He fought for her, mourned her, and he's raising you to know her even though it hurts him every day. That's love, Maddie, the real kind. I wish she was here. Maddie's voice was small and broken. I wish she could meet you. I think she'd like you. I think I would have liked her too. Naomi bent and kissed the child's forehead. Sleep now. Tomorrow we'll make bread, and you can help knead the dough. She left Maddie's room and found Rhett sitting at the table, working on what looked like accounts by lamplight. He glanced up as she entered, then quickly backed down. She's settled all right. She's fine. She misses her mother. Every day. His voice was flat, emotionless. Some days, I think it's getting easier for her, and then something small happens and she falls apart all over again. Naomi moved to the stove and poured herself coffee, then surprised herself by pouring a second cup and setting it in front of Rhett. He looked at it for a moment before accepting it with a quiet thanks. Can I ask you something? She said, sitting down across from him. He tensed, but nodded. Why did you really write that letter, the real one, I mean, before you changed your mind? Rhett was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down his pencil and met her eyes, and she saw naked vulnerability there. Because I was failing. As a father, as a person. I'd wake up every morning and think about Sarah, and the grief would hit so hard I couldn't breathe. Maddie needed me, but I had nothing left to give. I thought maybe if I found someone who understood that feeling, who'd been broken enough to accept broken in return, we could, I don't know, prop each other up. Be functional together, even if we couldn't be whole. That doesn't sound like failure to me. That sounds like recognizing you needed help. But I was doing it for the wrong reasons. I wasn't thinking about what I could offer someone else. I was just trying to stop drowning. Naomi wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, feeling its warmth seep into her palms. What if that's not wrong? What if sometimes the best we can do is find someone else who's drowning and agree to grab onto each other until we drift to shore? Rhett looked at her then, really looked, and she saw him registering her presence in a way he hadn't before. Not as a stranger who'd shown up unexpectedly, not as a mistake to be corrected, but as a person who might actually understand the darkness he lived in. You speak from experience. I spent 3 years traveling from town to town, trying to find somewhere I fit, trying to convince men that I was worth marrying despite my heritage. Each rejection took a piece of me until I wasn't sure there was anything left worth offering. I came here on that fake letter because I was out of options and out of hope. So yes, I understand drowning. They sat in silence, sipping coffee, while the fire crackled and the wind howled outside. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it was honest. Two people acknowledging their wounds without pretense or shame. I should check on the animals, Rhett said finally, standing. You don't have to wait up. I'll bank the fire before I turn in. He paused at the door, his hand on the latch. Naomi, thank you for staying, for being kind to Maddie, for all of it. Then he was gone into the cold night, and Naomi was left alone with the quiet cabin and her tangled thoughts. She finished her coffee, tended the fire, and went to her small room where Maddie slept peacefully. As she lay in her own bed, listening to the child's steady breathing, Naomi allowed herself to imagine what a month here might look like. Then 2 months. Then a year. She let herself picture teaching Maddie the herb lore her mother had passed down, cooking meals that filled this cabin with warmth and comfort, maybe even helping Rhett remember how to smile. It was dangerous to hope. Hope had betrayed her too many times. But here in the darkness, with the snow falling outside and the fire keeping them safe, Naomi let herself feel the smallest spark of it anyway. Maybe Tommy Prescott's cruel prank had led her exactly where she needed to be. Not to the life she'd imagined, but to the one she could actually build. Maybe it was dangerous to hope, but Naomi couldn't quite extinguish that small flame once it had been lit. The days that followed settled into a careful rhythm, each person learning the boundaries of their new arrangement. Naomi rose before dawn to start the fire and prepare breakfast, finding satisfaction in the simple routine of making a house feel like a home. Rhett worked the land with the determined focus of a man trying to outrun his thoughts, coming in only for meals and to spend time with Maddie before bed. And Maddie herself bloomed like a wildflower finally given water, chattering endlessly to Naomi about everything and nothing, teaching her the names of all the chickens and showing her the secret place in the barn where a mama cat had hidden her kittens. On the 5th day, Naomi was in the kitchen mixing bread dough when she noticed the beaded dress again, still draped across the trunk in the corner. Something about seeing it there, beautiful and sacred but unused, honored but not quite cherished, made her chest ache. She wiped her floury hands on her apron and moved closer, drawn by memory and recognition. The beadwork was exquisite, each tiny bead placed with intention and meaning. Her mother had owned a dress like this, had worn it for ceremonies and special occasions, treating it with the reverence it deserved. After her mother died, her father had carefully packed it away, unable to look at it but unwilling to let it go. Naomi wondered if Rhett felt the same paralysis, caught between honoring his wife's memory and being consumed by it. Mama made that dress herself. Maddie appeared at her elbow, quiet as a ghost. She told me all the patterns mean something, but I was too little to remember what. Naomi knelt down beside the child, pointing to the geometric designs worked in blue and white beads. These patterns tell stories. See this one? It represents the 4 directions, the sacred balance of the world. And this one is for protection, for keeping the wearer safe. Your mama put these here because she loved you and your father, and she wanted to carry that love with her always. Can you teach me? Maddie's voice was hushed, reverent. The stories, I mean. So I can remember? I can teach you what my mother taught me. It won't be exactly what your mama would have said. Different bands had different stories, but the heart of it is the same. They spent the morning like that, Naomi sharing what she remembered while the bread rose and the sun climbed higher. She told Maddie about the creation stories, about how Coyote brought fire to the people, about the importance of respecting the land and the animals that sustained them. Maddie drank it all in with desperate thirst, asking questions and making Naomi repeat certain parts so she could memorize them properly. When Rhett came in for the midday meal, he stopped short at the sight of them sitting beside Sarah's trunk, Maddie holding the beaded dress carefully in her small hands, while Naomi pointed out different symbols. Something crossed his face, pain, yes, but also something softer. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. Papa, look! Maddie held up the dress. Naomi's teaching me what all the patterns mean. Did you know this one is for courage? Mama was so brave, wasn't she? Rhett's throat worked as he swallowed. He moved closer, slowly, as though approaching something wild that might bolt. She was the bravest person I ever knew. She had to be, to survive everything she survived. Tell me, Naomi said quietly. Tell us about her. Not just that she was brave, but who she was. What made her laugh? What she loved. Rhett sank into a chair, his weathered hands clasped between his knees. For a long moment, Naomi thought he wouldn't answer, that she'd pushed too far. But then he began to speak, his voice rough with disuse at talking about things that mattered. She loved thunderstorms, used to stand on the porch and watch the lightning with this look on her face like she was watching old friends dance. She sang while she worked, songs in Comanche that I never quite learned all the words to but loved hearing anyway. She was terrible at sewing anything practical, could do the beadwork perfectly but couldn't mend a torn shirt to save her life. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, and she laughed at the worst times. I'd be trying to fix something and cursing because it was going all wrong, and she'd just laugh until I couldn't help laughing too. Maddie listened with rapt attention, tears streaming down her cheeks. I remember the singing. I remember her songs. She'd want you to remember everything, Rhett said, his voice breaking. Not just that she died, but how she lived. How much joy she carried even when the world tried to break her. Naomi felt her own eyes burning. This was what Rhett and Maddie had needed, permission to remember the whole person, not just the tragedy of losing her, to speak her name without shame or overwhelming grief, to let Sarah Running Deer be real again, fully human with all her quirks and beauty and imperfections. Would you teach me some of her songs? Naomi asked. The ones you remember. I know some from my mother, but every family had their own. Rhett looked at her with such raw gratitude that it nearly undid her. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. They spent the afternoon together, all 3 of them, while Rhett hummed half-remembered melodies and Naomi helped him piece together the words. Some she knew, others were fragments that might never be complete again, but the act of trying mattered more than perfect recall. Maddie sang along in her high, clear voice, and gradually the cabin filled with music it hadn't heard in 2 years. When evening came, Maddie was drowsy and peaceful in a way Naomi hadn't seen before. Rhett carried her to bed, and Naomi heard him singing one of Sarah's songs as a lullaby, his voice cracking, but steady. When he returned to the main room, his eyes were red, but his shoulders seemed lighter somehow. "I haven't talked about her like that since she died," he said, accepting the coffee Naomi offered. "Everyone in town either wanted to pretend she never existed or told me I needed to move on, stop wallowing. Nobody understood that I didn't want to move on. I just wanted to remember her without it destroying me." "Memory doesn't have to be destruction," Naomi said. "It can be a way of keeping people alive, of honoring what they gave us." They sat together in companionable quiet, and Naomi realized this was the first time Rhett had truly relaxed in her presence. The careful distance he'd maintained was still there, but it had softened into something more natural, more sustainable. The next morning, Naomi woke to Maddie's screams. She bolted from bed and rushed into the child's room to find Maddie thrashing in the sheets, her face flushed crimson and her eyes glassy with fever. Rhett was already there, trying to soothe her, but his hand shook and his face had gone white with fear. "She's burning up," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "This is how it started with Sarah. The fever came on fast and just kept getting worse." Naomi pressed her hand to Maddie's forehead and felt the terrifying heat radiating from the child's skin. The little girl whimpered and called out for her mama, delirious and frightened. Naomi's heart seized with fear, but she forced herself to think clearly. She'd seen fevers like this before, had helped her father treat them in their small community. "Rhett, look at me." She gripped his arm until he focused on her face. "I need you to bring me cold water from the well, as much as you can carry. Then start the fire hot. I'm going to need boiling water too. Move, now." He stumbled out, still half in shock, while Naomi gathered every blanket and sheet she could find. She stripped Maddie down to her shift and began gently sponging her with lukewarm water, talking softly to keep the child calm, even though Maddie barely seemed aware of her presence. "Stay with me, sweetheart. I know you feel awful, but you're going to be fine. I promise you're going to be fine." But even as she spoke the words, doubt clawed at her. What if she was wrong? What if this fever was something her remedies couldn't touch? What if she lost this child she'd come to love in just 5 short days? Rhett returned with water sloshing in 2 large buckets, his face carved from granite. "What do you need?" "In my trunk, there's a leather pouch with herbs and roots. Bring it to me, and get that water boiling. I need to make a tea." He obeyed without question, and Naomi saw the moment when he made a choice to trust her completely. He was handing his daughter's life into her hands, betting everything on skills he couldn't verify and knowledge he didn't understand. The weight of that trust nearly crushed her. She worked quickly, pulling out dried willow bark and elderflower, yarrow and sage. These were the remedies her mother had taught her, knowledge passed down through generations of healers. She measured carefully, knowing that too much could be as dangerous as too little, and prayed that her memory was accurate. "Help me sit her up," she told Rhett. "She needs to drink this." Together they coaxed the bitter tea past Maddie's lips, a spoonful at a time. The child fought and whimpered, but they persisted until the cup was empty. Then Naomi continued the sponge baths, keeping Maddie's fever from spiking higher while they waited for the medicine to work. Hours passed. The sun rose fully, throwing light across Maddie's flushed face. Rhett sat on one side of the bed and Naomi on the other, both keeping vigil while the child burned between them. Rhett held Maddie's hand and sang his wife's songs in a voice rough with fear and memory. Naomi changed the water and applied cool cloths, checking for any change in the fever's intensity. "Please," Rhett whispered at one point, and Naomi didn't know if he was praying to God, or Sarah, or the universe itself. "Please don't take her too. I can't lose her. I can't." "You won't," Naomi said with more confidence than she felt. "The fever will break. We just have to give the medicine time to work." But as midday approached and Maddie's fever showed no signs of abating, doubt crept in like poison. What if she'd mixed the wrong proportions? What if this illness required remedies she didn't know? What if she'd promised something she couldn't deliver? Then, just when despair threatened to overwhelm them both, Maddie stirred and opened her eyes. They were still glassy with fever, but there was recognition in them now. "Mama?" she whispered, looking at Naomi. Naomi's heart clenched. "No, sweetheart. It's Naomi. Your mama's in heaven, remember?" Maddie's face crumpled, but she reached out and grabbed Naomi's hand with surprising strength. "Don't leave me. Please don't leave me like Mama did." "I'm not going anywhere," Naomi promised, smoothing the damp hair back from Maddie's forehead. "I'm right here, and I'm staying right here until you're better." The child's eyes drifted closed again, but her grip on Naomi's hand remained tight. Across the bed, Rhett was watching them with an expression Naomi couldn't quite read. Grief and gratitude and something else. Something that looked almost like hope. "She called you Mama," he said softly. "She's delirious. She doesn't know what she's saying." "Maybe. Or maybe she knows exactly what she's saying and we're the ones pretending not to understand." Before Naomi could respond, Maddie began to shake violently, her small body convulsing with chills despite the fever raging through her. Rhett moved instinctively to pile blankets on her, but Naomi stopped him. "No, the fever has to break on its own. We can't trap the heat in." "But she's freezing." "I know, but if we try to warm her now, we'll make it worse." It was agony to watch Maddie suffer, to resist the instinct to comfort her in the most obvious way. But Naomi held firm, and Rhett trusted her even though every fiber of his being screamed to do something, anything, to ease his daughter's pain. They held Maddie's hands and talked to her, keeping her grounded while the fever raged and broke and raged again. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward evening, Maddie's forehead cooled beneath Naomi's hand. The terrible flush faded from her cheeks, and her breathing eased into something closer to normal sleep. The fever had broken. Rhett made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He buried his face in his daughter's small hand and wept, great shuddering tears that seemed to come from the very center of his being. Naomi reached across Maddie's sleeping form and rested her hand on Rhett's shoulder, offering the only comfort she knew how to give. "She's going to be all right," Naomi said. "The worst is over." "You saved her." Rhett looked up, his face ravaged but alight with something fierce. "If you hadn't been here, if you hadn't known what to do, God, I would have lost her. I would have ridden for the doctor who wouldn't come, and by the time I got back, don't," Naomi interrupted gently. "Don't torture yourself with what didn't happen. She's here. She's safe. That's what matters." But Rhett was shaking his head, still gripping Maddie's hand like a lifeline. "When Sarah got sick, I was helpless. I couldn't do anything except watch her slip away. I swore I'd never feel that helpless again, and then today. But you knew what to do. You fought for her. It's what anyone would have done." "No." His voice was firm now, certain. "It's what you did. Because you have knowledge and skill and courage. Because you didn't panic. Because you're—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "Because you're exactly who we needed." The weight of his gaze was too much. Naomi looked away, focusing on Maddie's peaceful face. "I should make some broth. When she wakes, she'll need to eat something light." She rose and fled to the kitchen before Rhett could say anything else, before the emotions swirling between them could crystallize into something she wasn't ready to name. Her hands shook as she prepared the broth, adding herbs that would help restore Maddie's strength. She told herself it was just exhaustion, just the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. But she knew it was more than that. Something had shifted between her and Rhett during those long hours at Maddie's bedside. Some barrier had crumbled, leaving them both more exposed and vulnerable than either was comfortable with. She'd seen him at his most terrified, and he'd trusted her with the thing he valued most in the world. That kind of intimacy couldn't be undone or ignored. When she returned to Maddie's room with the broth, Rhett was still there, still holding his daughter's hand. He'd stopped crying, but his face was raw, stripped of all the careful distance he usually maintained. "Thank you," he said simply. "I know I've said it before, but I need to say it again. Thank you for staying. Thank you for knowing what to do. Thank you for caring about her like she's your own." "She's easy to love," Naomi said, her voice thick. "Any fool can see that." They sat together through the evening, taking turns watching over Maddie. When the child finally woke fully around midnight, hungry and confused but clearly on the mend, They fed her small spoonfuls of broth and answered her questions about what had happened. Maddie's eyes kept drifting between them, seeing something that made her smile despite her exhaustion. "You didn't leave," she said to Naomi. "Even though I was sick and scary, you stayed." "Of course I stayed. That's what family does." The word slipped out before Naomi could stop it, and she saw Rhett's sharp intake of breath. But Maddie just nodded as though this was the most obvious truth in the world. "We're a family now. I knew we would be." She yawned hugely and nestled deeper into her pillows. "Mama sent you to us. I know she did." After Maddie drifted back to sleep, Rhett followed Naomi into the kitchen. She was cleaning up from the long day, trying to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied with practical tasks. But she felt him watching her, felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing down like a physical force. "Naomi." She turned to face him, wiping her hands on her apron. He stood in the middle of the room, looking lost and found at the same time, a man standing at a crossroads he hadn't expected to reach. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." Her heart began to pound, but she nodded. "When I wrote that letter, the real one, I was looking for someone broken enough to accept broken in return. Someone who'd settle for half a life because that's all I thought I had to give. But you," he stopped, seemed to gather his courage. "You're not broken. You're whole and strong and more capable than anyone I've ever met. You saved my daughter's life today. You've brought music and memory back into this house. You've made it feel like a home again instead of just a place where we exist until we die." "Rhett, please, let me finish." He took a step closer, and she could see him trembling with the effort of saying these words. "I don't know if I can love again. I don't know if that part of me died with Sarah or if it's just buried so deep I can't find it anymore. But I know that in 5 days you've become essential. I know that when Maddie was sick, the only thing that kept me from completely falling apart was seeing you fight for her. I know that this arrangement we made, this temporary practical 1-month trial, doesn't feel temporary anymore." Naomi's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying stay. Not as a housekeeper or a helper or someone earning wages. Stay as—" He struggled, his hands clenching and unclenching, "as part of this family. As Maddie's mother in truth, not just in her imagination, as my partner in making this place work. I can't promise you romance or passion. I can't promise the grief won't swallow me some days. But I can promise that you'll never be unwanted here. You'll never be judged for your heritage or made to feel less than. You'll be chosen every single day for exactly who you are." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Naomi felt tears streaming down her face, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. "I'm not asking for love," she said quietly. "I stopped believing in love a long time ago, after the third man looked at me with disgust instead of tenderness. But partnership, choosing each other deliberately, building something real together that I can believe in, that I can work toward. Is that a yes?" Naomi thought about the train platform where Maddie had first taken her hand, about the letter that promised respect and safety instead of pretty lies, about hours spent at a sick child's bedside watching a man confront his deepest fears. She thought about Sarah's songs filling the cabin again, about teaching Maddie the old stories, about the way this small, rough place had started to feel like the home she'd been searching for her entire life. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll stay. Not for a month. For as long as you and Maddie will have me." Rhett's face transformed, relief and gratitude and something warmer flooding his features. He closed the distance between them and pulled her into an embrace that was desperate and grateful and entirely without pretense. Naomi let herself lean into him, let herself accept this moment of connection without overthinking what it meant or where it might lead. They stood like that for a long time, two people who'd been drowning alone finally daring to grab onto each other. It wasn't romance, it wasn't passion, but it was real, and it was theirs, and that was enough. That was enough, Naomi told herself as she finally pulled away from Rhett's embrace. It had to be enough because anything more felt too dangerous to hope for. The days that followed Maddie's fever were tender and cautious, all three of them moving around each other with new awareness. Maddie recovered quickly, her resilience a testament to both youth and Naomi's careful nursing. She seemed to glow with satisfaction at having two adults devoted to her well-being, and took every opportunity to refer to them as my family, with the pleased certainty of a child who'd gotten exactly what she wished for. Rhett was quieter, more watchful. Naomi would catch him looking at her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite read, part gratitude, part confusion, part something that might have been the beginning of thaw after a long winter. He was a man relearning how to be alive instead of just surviving, and the process was clearly painful for him. For her part, Naomi threw herself into making the cabin truly livable. She mended curtains and organized the root cellar, planted herbs in clay pots on the windowsill despite the winter cold, and began teaching Maddie not just stories but practical skills: how to recognize healing plants, how to prepare remedies, how to move through the world with the confidence of someone who carried valuable knowledge. 2 weeks after Maddie's illness, an early November snowstorm rolled in with vengeful intensity. Rhett came in from morning chores with ice in his beard and worry in his eyes. "Roads will be impassable by afternoon," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "I need to check the fence line in the north pasture before it gets worse. One section was weak last week, and if it goes down in this weather, we'll lose cattle." Naomi looked out the window at the swirling white and felt unease prickle down her spine. "How long will you be gone?" "Few hours, maybe. I'll take the mare. She's sure-footed in snow." He pulled on his heavy coat and wrapped a scarf around his face. "Keep the fire going and don't let Maddie outside for any reason. Weather like this can turn a person around before they know they're lost." "We'll be fine. Be careful." He paused at the door, his eyes finding hers. "You sure you'll be all right?" "Rhett, I've been caring for myself for a long time. A few hours alone in a warm cabin won't undo me." He nodded, but still seemed reluctant to leave. Finally, he turned to Maddie, who was playing with her doll by the fire. "You mind Naomi, you hear? Stay inside and keep warm." "I will, Papa. Don't worry so much." After he left, Naomi and Maddie settled into quiet activities. Naomi worked on mending one of Rhett's shirts, while Maddie practiced the letters Naomi had been teaching her, carefully forming each one with the stub of a pencil on precious paper. The wind howled around the cabin, and snow piled against the windows, but inside they were cozy and content. An hour passed, then 2. Naomi put the mending aside and started preparing an early supper, wanting everything ready when Rhett returned cold and exhausted. She was cutting vegetables when Maddie suddenly gasped, "Naomi, look!" Naomi turned to see the child pointing out the window with wide, frightened eyes. There, barely visible through the driving snow, was a figure stumbling toward the barn. "That's Papa!" Maddie rushed toward the door, but Naomi caught her. "Wait, something's wrong." Whoa. She could see it in the way Rhett was moving. Uncertain, staggering, not heading for the cabin, but veering toward the barn as though he couldn't see where he was going. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me and don't open it for anyone but me or your father. Understand?" "But, Maddie, promise me." The child nodded, tears already forming. Naomi grabbed her coat and Rhett's spare, then plunged into the storm. The cold hit her like a fist, stealing her breath. Snow stung her face, and the wind tried to shove her back toward the cabin. She could barely see 3 feet ahead, but she kept her eyes fixed on that stumbling figure and pushed forward. "Rhett!" Her voice was torn away by the wind, useless. She pressed on, following his tracks, and finally reached him just as he collapsed against the barn door. His face was gray, his lips blue. Ice crusted his eyebrows and beard. When he tried to speak, his words were slurred and confused. "Fence. Had to fix. So cold." "How long were you out there?" She tried to support his weight, but he was too heavy, too unsteady. "Rhett, how long?" "Don't know. Horse spooked. Threw me. Walked back, but..." He blinked at her as though trying to remember who she was. "Sarah? You came back?" Terror shot through Naomi's chest. He was too far gone, already slipping into the delirium that preceded freezing to death. She had to get him inside, had to get him warm, but she wasn't strong enough to carry him, and the cabin was impossibly far through the blinding snow. Then she heard it, a small voice calling from the cabin door. "Naomi! Papa! Maddie! No! Stay inside!" But the child was already running toward them, her face set with determination. She grabbed her father's other arm, and together they began the agonizing journey back to the cabin. Rhett's weight dragged at them, and twice he nearly pulled them all down into the snow. But they kept moving, step by brutal step, until finally they stumbled through the door into blessed warmth. "Help me get him by the fire," Naomi gasped. "Then bring every blanket in the house." They got Rhett settled, and Naomi began stripping off his frozen clothes with shaking hands. His skin was dangerously cold, and he was barely conscious. Maddie appeared with an armload of blankets and quilts, her face white with fear. "Is Papa going to die like Mama?" "No." Naomi said it with every ounce of conviction she possessed. "No, he's not. But I need your help. Can you be brave for me?" Maddie nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Good girl, I need you to warm these blankets by the fire. Not too close, just enough to take the chill off. Then bring them to me. Can you do that?" While Maddie worked, Naomi rubbed Rhett's hands and feet, trying to restore circulation. She'd seen men survive exposure before, but she'd also seen them die from it. The key was warming them slowly, carefully, not shocking the system with too much heat too fast. "Stay with me," she murmured, chafing his cold hands between hers. "You don't get to leave us now, Rhett Lawson. Not after everything. You hear me? You promised Maddie and me a family, and I'm holding you to that." His eyes fluttered open, still confused but focusing on her face. "Naomi?" "Yes." "I'm here. We're getting you warm." "Maddie? Where's Maddie?" "She's right here, helping me save your stubborn hide. Now stop talking and let me work." They wrapped him in the warmed blankets, and Naomi prepared hot tea with honey, coaxing him to drink in small sips. Gradually, painfully, color began to return to his face. His shivering intensified, a good sign, Naomi knew, indicating his body was trying to warm itself again. She kept him wrapped tight and close to the fire, while Maddie hovered anxiously, bringing fresh blankets and checking his face for signs of improvement. Hours passed. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin was an island of warmth and desperate care. Finally, as night fell, Rhett's eyes cleared fully, and he looked at Naomi with recognition and understanding. "I got lost. I could see the cabin, but I couldn't reach it. Everything looked the same." His voice was rough, embarrassed. "Stupid. I know these lands like my own hand, and I got turned around like a greenhorn. The storm was blinding. Anyone could have gotten lost. But I shouldn't have. I should have been more careful, should have come back sooner. Instead, I nearly orphaned my daughter and left you alone to—" He stopped, his face crumpling. "God, I'm so tired. I'm so tired of almost losing everything." Naomi pulled him close, letting him rest his head against her shoulder. "But you didn't lose anything. We found you. We got you home. That's what matters." Maddie crawled into her father's lap despite the blankets, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "Don't scare me like that again, Papa. I can't lose you too." They sat huddled together by the fire, and Naomi felt the weight of how close they'd come to tragedy. If she hadn't seen him through the window, if Maddie hadn't helped her despite being told to stay inside, if he'd been even a few minutes longer in that cold, but he was here. They were all here. And somehow, through near disaster, they'd become something more solid, more real. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Rhett woke stiff and sore but alive, protesting when Naomi insisted he stay inside and rest. She won the argument by pointing out that if he collapsed again, she wouldn't be able to drag him back a second time. And Maddie needed at least one parent who wasn't risking their life through stupidity. "Fine," he grumbled, "but tomorrow I need to check that fence. Tomorrow we'll all go together, safety in numbers." He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something shift in his expression. "You saved my life last night." Maddie helped. She was braver than either of us. "I'm serious, Naomi. If you hadn't been here, if you hadn't known what to do—" He reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and steady now. "I owe you everything. My life, my daughter's life, everything that matters." "You don't owe me anything. This is what family does." There was that word again. Family. It seemed to echo in the space between them, full of promise and terror in equal measure. The storm kept them housebound for 3 more days. In that forced intimacy, something fundamental shifted between Naomi and Rhett. He began to talk more. sharing stories about his childhood and his years of wandering before he met Sarah. She told him about growing up caught between two worlds, never quite belonging to either, about her father's quiet grief after her mother died, and his determination to give Naomi every advantage, despite the obstacles her heritage created. They talked about Sarah too, and Naomi finally heard the full story of their meeting and courtship. How Sarah had been traveling with a small band of survivors, her people fractured and displaced. How Rhett had been working as a scout, hating every moment of being part of the system that was destroying tribes like Sarah's. How they'd talked through a long night while their respective camps slept, finding in each other someone who understood what it meant to be caught between duty and conscience. "She was my conscience," Rhett said quietly. "She made me see that just following orders wasn't enough, that I was complicit in things I knew were wrong. So I left the army, married her, and we ran here to try to build something better, something that didn't require compromising who we were." "Did it work? Were you happy?" "The happiest I'd ever been. Every day felt like stealing something precious. We knew it couldn't last. The world doesn't let people like us be happy for long. But we grabbed what time we could." His eyes were distant, remembering. "When she died, I thought the happy part of my life was over, that I'd spend whatever years I had left just getting through days, protecting Maddie, surviving. And now?" He turned to look at her, and she saw vulnerability in his face that took her breath away. "Now I'm starting to think maybe there's more than just surviving. Maybe there's actually living again." Before Naomi could respond, Maddie barreled between them, clutching a picture she'd drawn of the three of them standing in front of the cabin. "Look, it's our family!" She'd drawn them holding hands, big smiles on all their faces, the sun shining overhead. It was the simple, hopeful vision of a child who believed in happy endings. Rhett's voice was thick when he spoke. "That's real good, baby. Real good." They pinned the drawing on the wall near the stove, and every time Naomi looked at it over the following days, she felt that dangerous hope growing stronger. Maybe Maddie was right. Maybe they were already a family, and the only thing holding them back was their own fear of believing it could be true. A week after the storm, Rhett announced they needed to make a trip to town for supplies. The roads had finally cleared enough for travel, and they were running low on flour, sugar, and other staples they couldn't produce themselves. Naomi's stomach clenched with anxiety. She hadn't been back to Copper Ridge since that first humiliating day, and she wasn't eager to face the whispers and judgment again. "Maybe I should stay here with Maddie," she suggested. "No." Rhett's voice was firm. "We go together. All three of us. People need to see that you're part of this family now, that you're not just some temporary help I hired." "Rhett, you know what they'll say, what they'll think." "Let them think what they want. I spent 2 years caring too much about what people thought, and all it did was make me miserable and alone." He met her eyes steadily. "You're not alone anymore. Neither am I. And I'll be damned if I'm going to hide that like it's something shameful." So they went to town, the three of them squeezed into the wagon seat with Maddie chattering excitedly about seeing the mercantile and maybe getting peppermint candy if they had the money. As they entered Copper Ridge, Naomi felt every eye turn toward them, felt the weight of speculation and judgment pressing down. Rhett pulled up in front of the mercantile and helped Maddie down, then turned to offer his hand to Naomi. She hesitated, knowing that accepting his help, walking into that store beside him, would make a statement that couldn't be taken back. "Trust me," he said quietly. She took his hand. Inside the mercantile, Mr. Prescott looked up from his ledger, his face flushing when he saw them. "Mr. Lawson, Miss Hart, I want to apologize again for my son's behavior." "Already forgiven," Rhett interrupted. "We're here for supplies, not to rehash old business." They moved through the store, gathering what they needed while other customers whispered and stared. Naomi kept her chin up and her face neutral, refusing to show how much their scrutiny hurt. Maddie, oblivious to the tension, explored the store with delight, exclaiming over things she'd never seen before. They were at the counter, waiting for Mr. Prescott to total their purchases, when a woman in an expensive dress approached. She was perhaps 40, with steel gray hair and the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile. "Mr. Lawson," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "I heard you'd taken in a housekeeper. How charitable of you." Rhett's jaw tightened. Mrs. Blackwood. This is Naomi Hart. She's not a housekeeper. She's family. Mrs. Blackwood's eyes raked over Naomi with obvious distaste. Family? How progressive. I'm sure your late wife would be very understanding about you replacing her so quickly. The words hit like a slap. Naomi felt her face heat, but before she could respond, Rhett stepped forward, his voice cold as winter. My late wife understood what it meant to be judged by people who claim to be Christian while treating anyone different like dirt. She endured your whispers and your cruelty with more grace than any of you deserved. And she would absolutely approve of me making sure our daughter has a mother figure who treats her with love instead of pity. Well, I never... And another thing. Rhett's voice carried through the store now, making sure everyone could hear. Naomi saved my daughter's life when she had fever, and she saved mine when I got caught in that storm last week. She's done more for this family in 3 weeks than you and your charitable ladies' society have done for anyone in this town in 3 years. So yes, she's family. And if that offends you, you're welcome to take your business and your judgment elsewhere. Silence fell across the mercantile. Mrs. Blackwood's face had gone purple with indignation, but she seemed unable to find words. Finally, she turned on her heel and swept out of the store, her skirts rustling with righteous fury. Mr. Prescott cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, that was, shall we finish tallying your order? As they completed their transaction and loaded supplies into the wagon, Naomi's hands shook with reaction. No one had ever defended her like that before. Her father had tried, but he'd been one man against a whole town's prejudice. The 3 men who'd proposed to her had all folded the moment anyone questioned their choice. But Rhett had stood in a public place and claimed her, defended her, made it clear that anyone who wanted to hurt her would have to go through him first. On the ride home, Maddie fell asleep between them, exhausted from excitement. Rhett drove in silence for a while before speaking. I'm sorry you had to endure that. You're sorry? Rhett, you just made an enemy of one of the most powerful women in town for my sake. She was already my enemy. Whole town was, after I married Sarah. They just pretended to tolerate us before. Now at least we know where we stand. He glanced at her. I meant what I said in there. You're family, and I protect what's mine. What's mine? The words resonated through Naomi's chest like a bell. She was his, not in the sense of property, but in the sense of belonging, of being claimed and defended, of mattering to someone enough that they'd fight for her. Thank you, she said softly. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, and when they arrived home, they unloaded supplies together with practiced efficiency. Maddie woke up enough to help carry lighter items, then retreated to her room to play with a small toy Mr. Prescott had given her. Naomi was putting away flour when Rhett spoke from behind her. I need to tell you something. She turned to find him standing in the middle of the kitchen, looking uncomfortable and determined in equal measure. When we made this arrangement, I said I couldn't promise you love. I said I didn't know if that part of me still existed. And I meant it. I genuinely didn't know if I could ever feel that way about anyone again after Sarah. Naomi's heart began to pound. Rhett, let me finish. He took a step closer. I still don't know if what I'm feeling is love. It might be, or it might just be desperate gratitude and partnership and the knowledge that you make everything better. But whatever it is, it's real. And it's growing. And I need you to know that. She stared at him, this man who'd been a stranger a month ago and was now the center of her entire world. I don't need you to love me, she heard herself say. I just need you to keep choosing me, to keep believing I belong here. I do believe that. Hell, Naomi, I can't imagine this place without you anymore. You've become essential so fast, it's terrifying. They stood facing each other across the small kitchen, the space between them charged with possibility and fear. Naomi wanted to close that distance, wanted to feel his arms around her the way she had when Maddie was sick, when they'd both been too frightened and grateful to maintain careful boundaries. But she also knew that crossing certain lines changed everything, and she wasn't sure either of them was ready for that change. The decision was taken from her when Maddie's scream split the air. They both ran, crashing through the door to find Maddie's room empty, the window wide open, cold air pouring in. She was here 2 minutes ago, Rhett said, his face draining of color. She was playing, I heard her singing. Naomi looked out the window and saw small footprints in the snow leading toward the woods. She went outside. Rhett, she went into the forest. They didn't discuss, didn't plan. They just ran, grabbing coats as they went, following those tiny tracks into the darkening woods. The sun was setting, and temperature was dropping fast. A child alone in that cold wouldn't last long. "Maddie!" Rhett's voice was raw with terror. "Maddie, where are you?" They plunged deeper into the forest, calling her name, following tracks that were already starting to fill with fresh snow. And with every step, Naomi felt the cold hand of fear squeezing her heart, knowing that they were running out of time to find the little girl who'd claimed them both as family, who'd taken Naomi's hand that first day and asked if she could be her mama forever. Time was running out, and Naomi could feel it in every frantic beat of her heart as they crashed through the darkening forest. Maddie's tracks led them deeper into the trees, weaving between pines heavy with snow, and with each step the light faded a little more. "Why would she run out here?" Rhett's voice cracked with fear and confusion. "She knows better. She knows how dangerous—" There! Naomi pointed ahead where the tracks veered sharply toward the sound of rushing water. Her blood turned to ice. "Rhett! The creek!" They ran faster, branches tearing at their clothes, snow making every step treacherous. The sound of water grew louder, and then they burst through the trees onto the creek bank where winter runoff had swollen the normally placid stream into something wild and dangerous. And there, balanced precariously on a snow-covered rock in the middle of the rushing water, was Maddie. The child was sobbing, her dress soaked, her lips already turning blue. She clutched something small and orange to her chest. The barn cat's kitten, Naomi realized with a jolt. The fool child had chased the kitten out here and followed it onto the rocks. "Maddie, don't move!" Rhett's voice was steady despite the terror in his eyes. "Stay exactly where you are. We're coming to get you." "I'm sorry, Papa. I just wanted to save—" Her words dissolved into sobs as she shivered violently. Rhett was already moving toward the water, but Naomi grabbed his arm. "Wait! The current's too strong and the rocks are slick with ice. If you go in, you'll both drown. I can't just stand here. You won't, but we need to be smart." Naomi scanned the creek bank, her mind racing through possibilities. There, a fallen pine tree stretched partway across the water, not quite reaching Maddie's rock, but close enough. "Can you hold on to that tree and reach out to her?" "Maybe. But even if I can grab her, the current will pull her under the moment she lets go of the rock." Naomi's hands were already working at her coat. "Then I'll go in from downstream. When you pull her loose, the water will carry her toward me. I'll catch her." "Are you insane? That water is freezing. You'll die in minutes." "So will she if we don't do something right now." Naomi shrugged out of her coat and started unlacing her boots. Her fingers fumbled with cold and fear, but she forced them to work. "Rhett, we don't have time to argue. Get on that tree and be ready to grab her." For a moment she thought he'd refuse, thought his terror would override logic, but then something shifted in his face. A decision made. Trust given. He pulled her close for one brief, fierce embrace. "Don't you dare die on me, Naomi Hart. You hear me? Don't you dare!" "Same goes for you." She kissed his cheek quickly, tasting salt and fear. "Now go get our daughter." She moved downstream, positioning herself where the current would sweep Maddie. The water looked black and murderous in the failing light. Behind her she heard Rhett calling to Maddie, his voice calm and steady despite what she knew was roaring panic underneath. "That's my girl. Just hold on a little longer. I'm coming out on this tree, and when I say so, I want you to reach for my hand. Can you do that?" "I'm scared, Papa." "I know, baby, but Naomi's here and I'm here, and we're not going to let anything happen to you." Naomi waded into the creek, and the cold hit her like a knife to the chest. Her breath seized, her muscles locked, and for one terrible moment she thought she'd made a fatal miscalculation. But she forced herself deeper, feeling the current grab at her legs, and positioned herself in the only spot where she might possibly catch Maddie before the child was swept away completely. The water reached her waist, so cold it burned. She could feel her strength already beginning to drain away, knew she had only minutes before hypothermia made her useless. Everything depended on Rhett's timing. "Now, Maddie, reach for me now." She heard Rhett shout and saw a small shape tumble into the water upstream. The current seized Maddie immediately, dragging her under. Naomi pushed off the creek bottom and let the flow carry her toward where she'd seen the child go down. Her hand found fabric, Maddie's dress. She grabbed and pulled, but the current fought her, trying to tear the child away. Her other hand found something solid, an arm, a shoulder, and she hauled with everything she had. Maddie's head broke the surface, mouth open in a soundless scream, the kitten miraculously still clutched in one small fist. Naomi got both arms around the child and tried to turn toward shore, but her feet found nothing. The current had them both now, spinning them, dragging them downstream. Naomi's foot struck something, a rock, a log, and caught. Pain exploded through her ankle, but she welcomed it because it meant she was anchored. She pulled Maddie up higher, getting the child's head above water. But the creek floor beneath her gave way, and suddenly she was going under, cold black water closing over her head. She held on to Maddie with desperate strength, knowing that letting go meant the child would die. But her lungs were screaming, and the cold was everywhere, and she couldn't feel her legs anymore. The weight of her waterlogged dress dragged at her, and the current pushed her down, and she thought, this is it, this is how it ends. At least Maddie will survive. Then strong hands grabbed her, hauling her up and back. She broke the surface, choking and gasping, and Rhett was there, somehow in the water with them, his face a mask of determination as he fought the current that tried to claim them all. "I've got you both, hold on!" He dragged them toward shore, every step a battle against water and ice and exhaustion. Naomi's foot was still trapped, anchored between rocks, and she screamed as Rhett's pulling tore at her ankle. But then something gave way, and she was free, and they were stumbling onto the bank in a tangle of limbs and terror. Rhett collapsed beside them, all three of them heaving and shaking. Maddie still clutched the kitten, which was somehow alive despite everything, mewing pitifully. For a moment they just lay there in the snow, too exhausted and cold to move. But they couldn't stay. Night was falling, the temperature dropping, and they were all soaked to the skin. Hypothermia would kill them as surely as drowning if they didn't get warm fast. "Up," Rhett gasped, forcing himself to his feet. "We have to move. Naomi, can you walk?" She tried to stand and white-hot agony shot through her trapped ankle. "I don't think I can." "Then I'll carry you." He bent and lifted her as though she weighed nothing, his strength born of pure desperation. "Maddie, hold on to my coat. Don't let go for anything." The journey back to the cabin was a nightmare of cold and pain. Naomi drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of Rhett's ragged breathing and Maddie's small hand gripping her frozen fingers. She heard Rhett talking to them, a constant stream of words meant to keep them alert and focused. "Almost there. Just a little farther. You're doing so good, both of you. So brave. Sarah would be so proud. Almost home. Almost safe." When they finally stumbled through the cabin door, Rhett moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before, who'd learned the hard way how to save someone from freezing. He got the fire roaring and stripped them all down to bare skin, wrapping them in every dry blanket and quilt he could find. Maddie was shaking so hard her teeth rattled, but she was conscious and crying, which meant she'd survive. Naomi felt consciousness slipping again as her body tried to shut down, but Rhett's voice dragged her back. "No, stay with me, Naomi. Stay awake. Talk to me." "Cold," she managed through chattering teeth. "I know, but you're going to be fine. You both are. Just stay awake." He made them drink warm tea laced with honey and herbs, the same mixture Naomi had prepared for him after his exposure. He rubbed their hands and feet to restore circulation, talking constantly, keeping them grounded in the present, and gradually, painfully, warmth began to seep back into Naomi's frozen body. Her ankle throbbed with every heartbeat, swollen and angry. When Rhett examined it carefully, his face was grim. "Badly sprained, maybe broken. You're not going to be walking on that for a while." "Small price," Naomi whispered, looking at Maddie who was curled up beside her, the kitten tucked between them both. "She's alive. That's all that matters." Rhett's eyes filled with tears that finally spilled over. He buried his face in his hands and his shoulders shook with the force of everything he'd been holding back. Terror and relief and gratitude so intense it had to find release. "I thought I'd lost you both. When I saw you go under—" He couldn't finish, couldn't voice the horror of that moment. Naomi reached out with her good hand and touched his face, making him look at her. But you didn't lose us. You saved us. You came into that water even though you were already exhausted from saving me before. You carried me home. You're the reason we're all alive. No, his voice was fierce now, certain. You're the reason. You went into that creek knowing you might not come out. You held on to Maddie when the current tried to take you both. You sacrificed yourself to save her. She's my daughter, Naomi said simply, and realized it was true. Not through blood or legal papers, but through choice and love and the willingness to die rather than let her go. Of course I did. Maddie stirred between them, her eyes opening slowly. For a moment she looked confused, then memory crashed back and her face crumpled. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I saw the kitten go out the window and I was afraid it would freeze and I just wanted to help, and then I got stuck and… She dissolved into sobs. Naomi pulled the child close despite the pain it caused her ankle. Shh, sweetheart. You made a mistake, but you're safe now. We're all safe. But you almost died because of me. And Papa too, and I was so scared and Maddie, Rhett's voice cut through her panic, gentle but firm. Look at me. The child turned her tear-stained face to her father. What you did was foolish and dangerous. You know you're not supposed to go outside alone. You know the woods and the creek are dangerous in winter. And yes, your choice put all of us in danger. Fresh tears spilled down Maddie's cheeks. But, Rhett continued, you also showed courage. You tried to save a helpless creature, and when you got scared, you held on and trusted that we'd come for you. That's what family does. We make mistakes, and then we save each other from them. We don't love each other less because someone needed saving. We love each other more because we chose to do the saving. Really? Maddie's voice was small, hopeful. Really? Rhett pulled both Maddie and Naomi into his arms, wrapping his family in his embrace. We're all here. We're all alive. Nothing else matters. They stayed like that for a long time, tangled together by the fire, letting the warmth and safety sink in. The kitten mewed and Maddie giggled despite her tears, and somehow that simple sound broke the last of the tension. They were going to be all right. Over the next few days, they healed together. Naomi's ankle was indeed badly sprained, but not broken, and she resigned herself to staying off it and letting Rhett and Maddie care for her for a change. It was strange and uncomfortable at first, being the one who needed help, but she gradually learned to accept their service with grace. Maddie was especially attentive, bringing Naomi everything she could think of: water, books, her favorite doll to keep Naomi company. The kitten, christened Creek, in honor of his harrowing rescue, rarely left Maddie's side, as though understanding how close they'd both come to disaster. Rhett tended to both of them with quiet competence, cooking surprisingly decent meals and managing the household with minimal complaint. On the third evening, after Maddie had finally fallen asleep, he sat down beside Naomi's makeshift bed by the fire. Can I tell you something? His voice was low, intimate. Always. When I saw you go under that water, when I thought for one terrible moment that you were gone, I finally understood what I'd been too scared to admit. He took her hand, cradling it gently. I love you, Naomi. Not because you saved my daughter or because you're useful or because we need you. I love you because you're brave and kind and stubborn as hell, because you make me laugh again, because you see the broken parts of me and don't try to fix them, just accept them as part of who I am. Naomi's breath caught. Rhett, I know I said I couldn't promise you love. I was wrong. Or maybe I was right then and things changed. But however it happened, I'm in love with you, and I need you to know that before we go any further. Tears slipped down Naomi's cheeks. I love you too. I think I have since you offered me one safe night and treated it like a sacred promise, since you defended me in that mercantile, since you trusted me with Maddie's life. Then marry me. The words came out rushed, urgent. Not because it's practical or convenient, but because I love you and I want the world to know you're mine and I'm yours. Because I want Maddie to have the mother she's already chosen. Because I can't imagine living the rest of my life without you. We barely know each other. It's only been a few weeks. I know everything that matters. I know you're brave and loyal. I know you'd die to protect the people you love. I know you make the best bread I've ever tasted, and you sing to Maddie when you think no one's listening, and you cry at night sometimes but never let us see. I know that when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I want is to see your face." His voice softened. "I loved Sarah with everything I had. She was my first love, and losing her nearly destroyed me. But you're my second chance, Naomi, my deliberate choice. And I don't want to waste another day pretending this is temporary when we both know it's not." Naomi looked at this man who'd given her everything she'd stopped hoping for: home, family, love, belonging, who'd claimed her publicly and defended her fiercely, who'd nearly died trying to save her just as she'd nearly died trying to save his daughter. They'd been forged in crisis, tested by disaster, and emerged stronger for it. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, I'll marry you, not because I need rescue or security, but because I love you and Maddie more than I knew it was possible to love anyone. Because you chose me, and I choose you right back." Rhett kissed her then, gentle and reverent, as though she were something precious that might break. When they pulled apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time. "We should probably tell Maddie," Naomi said. "Tell me what?" Maddie's sleepy voice came from her doorway. She patted over in her nightgown, Creek trailing behind her. "Are you crying? Is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, baby." Rhett pulled his daughter into their embrace. "Everything's very, very right. Naomi and I are going to get married. That means she'll be your mama for real, with papers and vows and everything official." Maddie's face transformed, joy blazing across her features like sunrise. "Really? Really, truly?" "Really, truly," Naomi confirmed. "If that's all right with you." "If it's all right? It's the most all right thing ever." Maddie threw her arms around Naomi's neck. "I knew it. I knew from the very first day when you were sad at the train station. I knew you were supposed to be our family." They held each other and cried happy tears while Creek meowed his approval, and the fire crackled and outside the winter night pressed close against the windows. They were whole. They were home. The wedding was a simple affair, held on a bright December morning with the preacher from town and a handful of neighbors as witnesses. They gathered outside the cabin beneath a pine tree that Rhett and Sarah had planted together years ago, its branches heavy with new snow. Naomi wore the beaded dress that had belonged to Sarah, with Rhett's blessing and Maddie's insistence. "Mama would want you to wear it," Maddie had said, with the certainty of someone who knew deep truths. "She'd want you to carry her with us today." So Naomi stood in that beautiful dress, feeling Sarah's presence not as a ghost, but as a blessing, and took Rhett's calloused hands in hers. They spoke vows they'd written themselves, promising not perfection, but persistence, not constant happiness, but the willingness to fight for each other through grief and joy alike. "I choose you," Rhett said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Every day, for the rest of my life, I choose you. Not because you're perfect, but because you're perfectly right for me and Maddie, because you make us whole." "I choose you too," Naomi replied, her eyes bright with tears. "I choose this family we're building together. I choose to honor Sarah's memory by loving her daughter as my own. I choose to stop wandering and put down roots here with you, forever." When the preacher pronounced them married, Maddie whooped and threw handfuls of snow in celebration, and even stern Mrs. Blackwood, who'd come despite her earlier objections, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. The small gathering shared a simple meal in the cabin afterward, bread and stew and pie made from the last of the preserved berries. Mr. Prescott had brought cider, and Tommy stood awkwardly in the corner until Naomi called him over. "Thank you for coming," she said warmly. "I wasn't sure I should," he admitted. "After what I did, you made a mistake and you owned it. That takes courage. Now you get to see that sometimes the worst things lead to the best outcomes." She gestured around the room at the gathering of people who were slowly becoming her community. "Your prank brought me here. It gave me a family. I can't be angry about that, but—" Tommy's face flooded with relief. And something else. The beginning of wisdom, perhaps, that would serve him well in the years ahead. As evening fell and the guests departed, Naomi and Rhett stood on the porch watching the sun paint the snow-covered peaks in shades of copper and gold. Maddie played inside with Creek, singing one of Sarah's songs in her high, clear voice. "Happy?" Rhett asked, pulling Naomi close against the cold. Happier than I knew how to hope for. She leaned into him, marveling at how natural it felt. How right. A month ago, I was standing on that train platform, convinced I was unlovable, unwanted, worth less than nothing. Now I have everything. We have everything, Rhett corrected gently, and we almost lost it all in that creek. We almost missed this. But we didn't. We fought for it. We chose each other when it would have been easier to give up. Naomi turned to face him, her hands finding his. That's what makes this real, Rhett. Not that it came easy, but that we were both willing to risk everything for it. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, each touch a promise renewed. I love you, Mrs. Lawson. I love you too. They went inside together, into warmth and light and the sound of their daughter's laughter. And in the corner, barely visible in the gathering shadows, Sarah's beaded dress hung on its peg, no longer a memorial to death, but a bridge between past and future, a blessing passed from one love to the next. The winter passed in a blur of small joys and daily rhythms. Naomi's ankle healed completely, and she threw herself into making their home flourish. She planted seeds in the windows for spring, taught Maddie reading and numbers and herb lore, and worked beside Rhett to prepare for the coming growing season. They talked about expanding the cabin, maybe adding another room or two, and Rhett mentioned possibly taking on more cattle if the spring was good. On a cold February night, Naomi woke to find Rhett gone from their bed. She pulled on a shawl and went looking, finding him standing outside in his coat, staring up at the stars. Can't sleep? She asked, joining him. Just thinking. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. About how different everything is now. A year ago, I was so deep in grief I could barely breathe. Now I'm standing here with you, and Maddie's safe inside, and I can actually imagine the future again. Do you still miss Sarah? Every day? But it doesn't hurt the way it used to. It's more like... He searched for words. Like she's part of who I am now, woven in, but not weighing me down anymore. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. Naomi rested her head on his shoulder. I think she'd be happy for us. For Maddie especially. I know she would. Sarah always wanted Maddie to be loved fiercely and raised strong. You're doing that. You're being exactly the mother she would have wanted for our daughter. They stood together under the stars, and Naomi felt a contentment so deep it was almost frightening. She'd learned not to trust good things, to wait for the inevitable betrayal or rejection. But this man beside her, this life they were building, it felt solid in a way nothing else ever had. Rhett, I have something to tell you. He turned to look at her, concern flickering across his face. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby. His eyes went wide, then filled with tears. Are you sure? Very sure. I'd say about 2 months along, which means the baby will come in late summer. Rhett pulled her close and held on tight, his face buried in her hair. A baby. Our baby. When he pulled back, he was laughing and crying at once. Maddie's going to lose her mind with excitement. Should we tell her tomorrow? Should we tell me what? Maddie's voice came from the doorway, sleepy and curious. She'd wrapped herself in a blanket and stood there looking at them with those two knowing eyes. Naomi and Rhett exchanged glances. Then Naomi knelt down to Maddie's level despite the cold. You're going to be a big sister. There's a baby growing inside me. And in a few months, we'll have a new member of our family. Maddie's mouth fell open. Then she launched herself at Naomi, nearly knocking her over. A baby! A real baby! Can I help take care of it? Can I teach it songs? Will it like me? The baby will love you, Naomi promised, holding the child close, just like we all do. They went back inside together, all talking at once about names and plans and how they'd need to build a cradle. And as Naomi watched Rhett and Maddie debate whether the baby would be a boy or girl, she felt that dangerous hope solidify into certainty. This was her family. This was her home. Not perfect, not without scars, but wholly and completely hers. Summer arrived in waves of heat and golden light. The cabin had been expanded with a new room for the coming baby, and Naomi's herb garden flourished beside the house. Neighbors who'd once whispered now stopped by to drop off baby clothes and advice. their acceptance grudging at first, but growing warmer as they saw how happy the Lawson family was. On August evening, as the sun painted the mountains in shades of amber and rose, Naomi's labor began. The midwife came from town, and Rhett paced outside while Maddie held Naomi's hand and sang her grandmother's songs to keep her brave. The baby arrived just after midnight, a healthy boy with a shock of black hair and lungs that announced his presence to the world. Rhett wept when the midwife placed the child in his arms, and Maddie climbed onto the bed to peer at her new brother with wonder. "What should we name him?" Rhett asked, looking at Naomi with such love it made her heart ache. "I was thinking, if it's all right with you, I'd like to name him Thomas." She saw Rhett's confusion and explained, "After Tommy Prescott, because his prank, as cruel as it was, led me here, led me to you and Maddie, led me home." Rhett smiled, understanding. "Thomas Lawson. I like it. And maybe we can give him a middle name in Comanche, something Sarah would have chosen?" "She'd have chosen something strong," Maddie said seriously, "something about courage and family." So they named him Thomas and gave him a Comanche name that meant chosen family. And as they sat together in the lamplight, Rhett and Naomi, Maddie and the new baby, Naomi felt the story that had begun on that cold train platform finally complete itself. She'd been rejected 3 times before arriving in Montana. 3 men who'd looked at her heritage and seen only what was wrong, what was less than. But that rejection had led her here, to a man who saw her clearly and loved her anyway, to a daughter who'd claimed her from the first moment, to a life richer than any promise could have delivered. On the wall near the stove, Maddie's drawing still hung, 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a cabin. Except now there was a 4th figure scribbled in crayon, small and swaddled, completing the picture. "We're all here," Maddie said, looking at the drawing with satisfaction. "Mama and Papa and me and Thomas, a whole family." "A chosen family," Naomi corrected gently, using the baby's Comanche name. "The best kind there is." That night, as Rhett held his son and Maddie curled up beside Naomi, all of them together in the lamplight, Naomi finally allowed herself to believe in happy endings. Not the kind from fairy tales where everything was perfect and nothing ever hurt again, but the real kind, earned through crisis and choice, built on the foundation of people who'd decided to stop drowning alone and learn to swim together. She'd come to Montana on a fake letter, seeking a marriage of convenience. Instead, she'd found something far more valuable, a love forged in honesty, tested by tragedy, and proven strong enough to build a life upon. She was no longer the woman nobody chose. She was Naomi Lawson, chosen deliberately and loved fiercely, exactly as she was. And that was worth more than any promise, any plan, any hope she'd carried alone. Because this family, this love, this home, they hadn't just happened to her. They'd chosen her, and she'd chosen them right back. Every single day they chose each other, and nothing was left behind.